Welcome to Femme and Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Rose Portela, and if you saw me in these clothes yesterday during the fully loaded bonus episode, no, you didn't. I am in rare form right now. I'm putting on much more energy than I have. I am dying with my period. I could tell you guys that because we're friends, right? I am in final boss girl rots on couch mode right now. And yet I knew this episode had to go out. So today, as my accessories, I have my blanket that my best friend Alexa gave me a bajillion years ago. I refuse to get rid of this blanket. I've got a Celsius because coffee just was not cutting it today. And I really needed like the extra dose of caffeine just to get through this fucking episode. It took me about 7 hours to write my notes on this. And I feel like this is still going to be a quick episode. There's so much that happens in this episode of Euphoria that we're going to talk about today. I also, with me as an accessory, have a Twizzler, and this is how we're rocking today's episode. I normally try to show up and be about as professional as I can since this is my fucking job. But today is day 1 of my period and I'm dying. So, cheers. We are talking about Euphoria, season 3, episode 2, America My Dream. I'm just going to get right into it. When I first watched this episode, a lot was happening and I wasn't really sure how I was feeling about it. I don't know if you guys felt the same way. I'm having a hard time rooting into like Euphoria 2.0. And I really wanted to sit with it before I wrote my notes for today's episode and try and be present for whatever the vision of this creative endeavor is. And that's not to say that it's without critique. I will be critiquing some things today. But I think that the things that Euphoria has always flirted with are just being exploited now, or like adultified, quote unquote. Like these ideas that it flirted with in season 1 and season 2 are now like adulting in season 3. And so I kind of just wanted to take the concepts that Sam seems to be interested in talking about. Again, so he says, is the idea of good and evil, freedom, and its consequences. So instead of being disappointed that like Labyrinth's music isn't in the show and the color palette has graduated to something that is less surreal, and there is a lot less surreal stuff that's happening in the show, which I'm missing. That's like the part of Euphoria that I really like. I really like when Rue breaks the fourth wall. I really like when we get these sort of like fantastical elements. And I don't know, I'm a theater kid at heart. I went to school for theater, so this is like what drew me in. You know, not to say that the storyline didn't, but I love the way that they explored all of these sort of like complex and nuanced themes in season 1 and season 2, but through this like very surreal exploration of them and fantastical exploration of them that is missing for me this season. We are now in episode 2 out of, I believe, 8 episodes. So that's not to say that we won't get it at all, but I feel like there's less Rue dialogue than normal, like not dialogue in the show, but like Rue voiceover storytelling, giving us back end information. I feel like a lot of that is missing. And I feel like the scenes that I love, you know, the season 1 finale where Rue relapses and she's singing All For Us with Labyrinth, and we've got the whole church choir with her, you know, lifting her up, dancing around her. That's the kind of shit that I fucking love from Euphoria, and I think a lot of that is missing. Last episode had a very Breaking Bad kind of feel to it, which is fine. A lot of things emulate Breaking Bad at this point. It's a popular show for a reason. This particular episode had a lot of Quentin Tarantino-esque shit going on. The show seems to be kind of going in this like different direction, and I think the things that really worked for me in Euphoria, outside of just like Zendaya's performance and Labyrinth's music, is missing. With that being said, I wanted to be about as present as I possibly could be with what the show is trying to say and extracting the feminist themes from it to the best of my ability, because there is a lot of things to talk about surrounding women or women's issues in this show and in this particular episode. We'll see how it goes as the season goes, but how I'm going to do today's episode is break it down by different themes, and then I sort of have like a miscellaneous category where I'm like, these are things that we obviously need to talk about from this episode, but they didn't really fit into any of these themes in particular. So the first theme that I want to talk about is the American dream as a beauty economy, or the idea of putting a price tag on a woman's body as the epitome of the American dream. So the episode, which is titled America, My Dream, right, as given to us by Juana in this episode, is really circling the idea of what is the American dream. And it's not this like glossy, work hard and you'll make it version, you know, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, self-made America that America tends to brand itself as. It's more like the American dream has been rebranded in Euphoria land as a beauty economy. And that's not to say that that's not a part of the American dream as is like designed right now. It's just that that's not the only way that we tend to talk about it, right? So in this version of the American dream, as told on Euphoria, a woman's body isn't just her body, it is her currency. It's her path to success in America. It's something to be optimized, it's something to be marketed, it's something to be sold. And the show is basically saying, like, look, this whole system runs on exploitation across the board. But for women in particular, there is this added unspoken tax of their physical body. Something about the idea of the women on this show, like their desirability becomes their resume, and their ambition then gets rerouted to this experience of like how well they can perform womanhood. But the show is interested, or at least I think this episode is interested in showing that the American dream is exploitive, right? That all of these people who are building their American dream are building it off of somebody else's work or somebody else's success or somebody else's body. So before we really dive into that any deeper, I think we have to talk about Sam Levinson here, because this matters to me. I watched this episode the first time through and I felt a little icky, which I think the show is supposed to leave you feeling a little bit icky, okay? So I do feel that that's the point, but you have a show that is centered around 5 women, including 1 trans woman and 2 women of color. Now, in earlier seasons, the show flirted with objectification of women, sure, but it felt tied to character exploration in a way that exploring your sexuality and understanding your sexuality and understanding your sexual prowess and power is a part of a coming of age story. This season, however, is tipping into something that's a little bit harsher. And it's almost like this humiliation of women has become a part of the aesthetic of the season, particularly for Cassie's character, which we'll talk about more in depth. But when you pair that with the fact that Sam Levinson is a cis, straight, white man who is writing, directing, producing the entire show. This is Sam Levinson's unfettered creative vision, right? It is unobstructed by anyone else this season. And this starts to feel a lot less like a layered exploration of culture and society and more like a singular fantasy or Sam Levinson's personal ideology being projected outward through this piece of art. That's his right. It's his show. But it feels like even in the increased use of like racial language, especially in this episode, it's very, very jarring, and not in a way that adds any particular depth. It actually felt highly uncomfortable. I was kind of glad to get through it the first time so that I could expect it the second time around and be prepared to sit with like how I was feeling as we moved through what this episode of television is. You know, you can't talk about this episode of television without talking about Sam Levinson, because it kind of exposes the thesis in real time, which is that systems of power, especially ones built by white men, thrive and are successful off of the labor and bodies of women and Black people. Also important to talk about in this episode is the noticeable absence of Lexi. She is the only one who has followed the traditional American dream out of all of these girls. She went to school, she went to college, she got a stable job, she did the whole checklist, the whole American dream checklist. And yet she's nowhere to be found in this narrative of success in an episode titled America, My Dream. She's the only one of these girls who is not commodifying herself in some way or another. She's not playing the desirability game in some way or another. And the show is suggesting that the path that Lexi takes, while technically correct, doesn't make you aspirational in this world, and it certainly doesn't sell. Maddie is obviously the clearest example of someone who understands the system and chooses to play it. She's got a fake it till you make it approach to success. She's got a very fascinating pitch that she offers to her boss because she frames it as independence. That's how she is perceiving it to herself. She even says, I'm not a victim, I don't believe anyone owes me anything, and I believe in capitalism. But underneath that, she's essentially branding herself to her boss as non-threatening, easy to manage, and highly profitable. See, she's not selling her skills. Nowhere in there does she say, I'm great at answering phones, I'm really good at negotiating contracts. I have no problem with big personalities. Like, I could totally handle all of the stuff that comes through. She's marketing herself. She doesn't need to sell her skills because she is selling her attitude and her compliance to the system that is ultimately going to make her successful. And then you have Caitlin, right? Who we meet through Maddie. Caitlin is this influencer archetype who is supposed to have this uncanny resemblance, I believe, to Addison Rae. I think she's like an Addison Rae stand-in. And she's even in this scene where they've got the ring light going, they're in the ball pit, and she's got two brunettes with her with like long brown hair who are like supposed to be stand-ins, I think, for Charlie and Dixie D'Amelio. And they're all yelling drill house instead of hype house. But yeah, you get the point. This is like the thing that was happening during COVID. Charlie D'Amelio and Addison Rae were the two biggest stars at that point while they were home making content. And we were all just like sitting on our phones and consuming it. She's less of a person and more of a product. That is what Caitlin is designed to be in the show. And this is the American dream, according to Sam Levinson. This idea of exploiting others to get ahead, which is what Maddie is doing with Caitlin. She is exploiting Caitlin for her own benefit. Does Caitlin benefit too? Yeah. But Caitlin is the one who is putting her body on the line, taking nudes, all of these salacious photo shoots, and Maddie's just taking a percentage of it. So Maddie's not the one who's putting her body on the line. She's just profiting off of somebody else doing so. On top of that, Maddie is literally editing this girl, Caitlin, into perfection. She's smoothing out her cellulite. She's erasing her stretch marks. She is constructing a version of beauty that doesn't obviously exist in real life. We know that, but thrives in this sort of like online Instagram economy where we have filters that are skewing our perception of what beauty is. And it's this very specific message of like, you are not just competing with other women, which is what Maddie will later say to Cassie, which is like the market is oversaturated, but you are competing with edited versions of them. Now, Magic's storyline takes on a bit of a darker shade because she is wearing this neck brace. She's been injured, clearly, and there is something very chilling about the fact that her pain becomes an asset to her personally because she mentions being able to win 12 grand from a lawsuit. So whatever happened to her, this experience that she had where she ends up in a neck brace is actually a benefit to her. So her body is a part of this like potential financial win. But of course, the Silver Slipper rejects this because it interferes with her sex appeal. So it's like an exploitation of her body layered on top of an exploitation of her body. And in either scenario, her body is the site of harm or attention and her tool for financial success. And then we have Jules, who's operating, in the next lane over on traffic. She's a sugar baby, living in a penthouse. It's not hers. She's wearing something that is quite symbolic of her femininity, right? She's wearing this dress made entirely of bras. It's all very on the nose, as are a lot of things this episode. But her luxury is borrowed and her freedom is conditional. She is trading her desirability in this transactional way to achieve a lifestyle that suits her. So when you take a step back, the episode is really exploring these individual storylines. Like these women are just a marketplace. They've got different booths, they've got different strategies, but they've got the same underlying product, which is their bodies. And if you want to access the American dream, then guess what, Mr. Man? You've got to pay to play. Or guess what? If you're a girl, you've got to play to get paid. So there's this kind of ties in with another theme. They're very similar, but they are slightly different, which is like this idea of power versus like proximity to power. So on the surface, all of these women in the show look like they are choosing a path of empowerment and that they are making moves, but the scaffolding around these choices is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. There's like 4 horsemen or like 4 corners to this idea of power that all of these women are trapped in. If let's just say it's a cage, it's like money, men, addiction, and like attention or desperation. And it is all wrapped up in their own individual versions of what they perceive success to look like. So Jules is the most fairy tale coded version of this. After the episode literally says that they have intentionally framed her as Rapunzel. They are tucking her away in this ivory tower, this cold, modern, beautiful penthouse in this elevated space high above the city with her long 50-inch hair. But if you think about it, Rapunzel was not free. She was trapped in this tower. And she was very comfortably contained, but contained nonetheless. Jules is not building any real power for herself. Sure, she might be able to do her art, but what happens if this arrangement with the sugar daddy goes sideways? Then she no longer has the stability that she would need to pursue her art in such a free way. And a lot of artists don't get this experience where they're able to rely on somebody else's money to be able to get their career started. We do know that she is working on art because we see that she's got a canvas there and we see that she's been painting before. We know that she was in art school, but we don't know what's happened since then and where, the disconnect between being like a starving artist and being somebody's sugar baby, where that gap was bridged. So everything that she has that is considered her empowerment is just her orbiting somebody else's legitimate power or success. Some man who has a spare penthouse is able to gift it to her. Her clothes, her lifestyle, it all exists because somebody else allows it to. Meanwhile, Maddie is playing a much sharper game. She's inside the machine now, and she's helping to run it. Maddie is a talent manager. She is a curator of beauty. She is a gatekeeper of success, really, because that's what sounds like power. But the second that she ignores her instincts with Caitlin, it completely backfires on her because her stability is tied to pleasing the system or pleasing her boss, who really has the power, and not challenging it. I mean, that's not for lack of trying. She does try to make a case for Caitlyn, but she never really actually achieves it for herself. She can get close to it, she can taste it, but she can't fully own it. And that's because she went against her own instincts, right? For what the proximity to power that she had. Rue's storyline is where it gets all grimy, like literally and metaphorically. She says she made a deal with the devil. She says this while she's standing in front of a bunch of flames, which is a bit heavy-handed for my taste, but whatever. She's claiming that she's free in this moment. But the show immediately undercuts that because any sort of freedom that requires you to cover up a death, wade through pig shit, and do the bidding for somebody like Alamo, you can just see that that's obviously not freedom. In fact, the work that she's doing for Alamo is so debased that she ends up doing the most deplorable thing, which is becoming complicit in the trafficking of somebody else, or at least I think that that's what's happening. So I love the scene where she's dropping Angel off at Rehab because she is wearing a maroon shirt, which is not accidental. It's not her dad's jacket, but it's close enough to like the echo of her iconography, right? This is obviously an intentional costuming choice. It is like she is cosplaying Control around addiction while she is still tethered to the same systems that have put her into the position to be tempted to go into the same patterns. And this experience that she's having with Angel, where she's on the other side of the intervention and she's on the other side of caring about somebody who's not doing well, who's really struggling. This is the closest that she's been to addiction in this capacity for a minute, it seems like, couple years maybe. And even though, you know, she does go to advocate for Angel to Alamo, getting Angel to rehab is partly altruistic because she is helping someone when she has been there herself and she knows that this is going to be the best thing for somebody this deep into addiction. But part of it is also tied to the fact that Alamo promised her a promotion if she could get Angel into rehab. So as they're driving, Angel says, "This is a weird place." And Rue goes, "California?" Angel then says, "You know, people go missing here more than anywhere else in America. It's like there's this big magnet beneath the soil attracting evil." The second she said that, I was like in full Euphoria mode. This is the closest it's felt like OG Euphoria this entire season. In my humble opinion, I was like, Rue, abort mission. Abort, abort, abort. Like, stop the car. This is not going to work out well. Especially when they then pulled up to the rehab center and Rue, who absolutely knows what rehab is supposed to look like, leaves this girl Angel there. We have the flickering lights. We have the sort of like very off vibe that is happening. It all screams that this is not a safe place like rehab is supposed to be. Rue doesn't have to fill out any paperwork, which you can see on her face that she's kind of like, that's a little weird. The receptionist barely gives her attention to Rue, has dirty ass nails. So either Angel is about to get killed and buried, but truly I think when that van pulls up behind Rue, that they are there to pick Angel up and traffic her. And if Angel is being trafficked, then Rue's version of freedom that she's so focused on is directly funded by another woman's loss of it. And whether she knows this or not yet doesn't even particularly matter because it's clear that she doesn't think that this is what's happening, right? She thinks that this is something kind that Alamo has offered to do for this woman. And even if she feels like something's off, I don't think, going to this place yet. That's where I went. So once again, this idea of America, my dream, being the exploitation of somebody else to get there. So as Rue is leaving, we also see that she's being watched, paired with the fact that Magic mentioned earlier in her little spiel that something about a private investigator that adds this layer of surveillance. Like the whole thing that's going on with Alamo and the Silver Slipper is a rotten ecosystem that's finally attracting attention. Whether it's justice, whether this is a private investigator who is investigating to discover something nefarious, or whether it's just another predator, sort of remains to be seen. The fact that it would be after this scene felt kind of important, especially because Lori and her people basically told Rue, like, you're gonna go drop off drugs to this guy and kind of like get the fuck out of there because he's really fucked up and doing some fucked up shit. And so far, outside of there being a lot of drugs in the strip club, we haven't really seen anything that's that insane that would cause the drug suppliers to say that these people are crazy. So it's not the fact that there's drugs that being involved that is what is ringing alarm bells for somebody like Lori, who, just last season, even though it was 5 years ago, who just last season preyed on a minor teenage girl who is a drug addict by getting her essentially to sell herself to her for some morphine, as she's going through withdrawals. So the fact that Lori is this like predator in and of herself, and she thinks that Alamo's a bad guy. There's a little Watson ear in case someone's watching, a little Watson face. Yeah, that feels there's something deeper about Alamo that we haven't quite gotten to yet. And of course, it's only episode 2, so we have a whole season to get there. Then we have Cassie, who is only looping back to Maddie when there's money to be made, which also fits right into this theme too. Their relationship isn't about reconciliation, it's about transaction now. Cassie is willing to exploit her connection with Maddie by fake apologizing essentially and milking Maddie for her connections, and Maddie is willing to let Cassie continue to make an idiot of herself while getting paid for it, or at least that's what we think is going to happen. And then we have Nate, who is drowning in debt. He is robbing Peter in his investors to pay Paul, whoever this guy Naz is, right? He's the flip side of this whole equation. This idea that like even someone who is supposed to traditionally benefit from the system isn't immune to being trapped by it. So power is not stable even for somebody like Nate fucking Jacobs, which is just putting the rest of our girls at like a complete disadvantage after that. Another theme that seems to be unfolding in this episode and maybe, over the course of this season is like the morality of sex work and the character's response to their own ethics and morality around sex work, and therefore like us, the audience, and our response to all these different experiences of sex work. So like take Caitlyn, she's labeled as a porn star for doing OnlyFans, is immediately flattened into this category that is meant to carry shame. Maddie pushes back on this by saying that it's different, and it doesn't really like dismantle the judgment because Maddie judges these girls too. It sort of just like reroutes it, but at the same time, Maddie is very careful to position herself as separate from these girls. She does not let anyone call Caitlyn her friend. To say that Caitlyn is her client, very specifically her client, not her friend. Maddie is not the one that is selling her body, but she is the one that is packaging somebody else's. There's some sort of moral hierarchy here that she would like to fall under, where she has climbed like one rung up the ladder, and now she gets to look down on the girls that are below her and say like, I'm not that. She even says, I'm not a hooker. And that line is there to differentiate her from these clients, even though functionally she's still participating in the same work. Just with like, quote unquote cleaner hands, I suppose. But it's giving like digital pimp energy, whether she wants to admit that or not. Angel's scene in the Boom Boom Room is where the vibe shift from transactional to predatory. We have these like taxidermy animals that are all predators, designed to be predators, intentionally chosen that way by the set designer. She is performing here, but there's money involved. So technically it's work, but it's an environment that's being surveilled by who? We don't really know. I suppose we can presume that it's somebody at the Silver Slipper, overseeing that. But the fact that we sort of see somebody who we don't know watching Rue makes me feel like there is something else going on entirely, and that they are being surveilled legally. It creates this like sense of unease, actually. The show is asking us to draw our own understanding of what do we feel are the moral and ethical differences between someone like Caitlin, someone like Maddie, and like someone like Angel, who's, got a guy doing blow off her tits in the boom boom room and then gives him a blowjob, and what are our personal feelings about that? And what does the show and the different characters feel about the different levels of sex work that are happening? Rue is also fascinating because mentally she carves out her own exception. Rue is doing objectively dangerous illegal work. She's running drugs, she's covering up deaths and overdoses, she is operating in this very dark sexual ecosystem, and she still draws a moral line at Jules being a sugar baby. In Rue's framework, her choices are about her freedom, while Jules's choices are framed as something else entirely, something that Rue judges quite harshly. And so this is where the show, kind of holds up the mirror directly, I think, to the audience, which is like, here we are watching a show where Rue, a character who has zero right to feel judgmental about anything that anyone else does with their body, who last season was so fucked up and high that she couldn't make a fist to get intravenous drugs. She could not possess enough motor skills to undo a Jolly Rancher. She literally was so high at one point that she says, I can't even be into the sex that my girlfriend is trying to do with me right now because I'm so numb. Yet we root for a character like Rue, who has done some really deplorable things for drugs, in the name of drugs, said some really awful things. She's stolen from people, she's been involved with people that have not been good or done good things. Like, she's done deliberately illegal things in the name of drug taking or dealing drugs, and yet she draws a moral line, a consensual agreement between Jules and her sugar daddy. Cassie's storyline is where morality, performance, and identity all start to kind of like blur into something that is surreal. It's like life imitating art and art imitating life in an infinity loop. She's taking topless photos in her yard. She is wrapped in a wet American flag while I Want to Be Loved by You by Marilyn Monroe plays. And we get this voiceover from Rue that says, Maddie would have loved to sign Cassie. Cassie was exactly the kind of girl you dreamed of signing. Beautiful but directionless. She becomes this hyper stylized symbol, not a person, but an idea. She is this right-wing, patriotic, patriarchal, wet dream. And it is hard not to pass judgment on Sydney Sweeney after she refused to denounce white supremacy, and then add in the fact that Cassie is designed to be a character who has no true identity, who is a stand-in for these right-wing women who are supposed to be these perfect girls, perfect women, who are also completely untethered from any real sense of self. And when she asks, who am I? It's not a rhetorical question. It feels like the first honest exploration of this like right-wing ideology and how women are projected in it. Even her neighbor reacts with confusion about Cassie's like sexy baby photos, and it reinforces this tension between normalization of sexual kink and desire and like stigma. Some people see it as empowerment, others see it as something unsettling, which in the case of the baby, I think it is unsettling. But Sydney Sweeney performing as Cassie doing this like humiliation kink is just very hard to digest. It's not pleasing to watch. It's uncomfortable. And that is a part of, Sam holding the mirror up to us, the audience, and asking us what versions of sex work we're comfortable with. Because there's something about Caitlyn doing OnlyFans that is not projected in the same way as the way that Cassie's character is doing it. You then have the porn versus like erotica distinction that Nate and Cassie argue about, which is honestly just semantics, but it matters to them because the language becomes a shield for whatever Cassie is doing. So erotica sounds curated and intentional and artistic, while porn sounds crude and disposable. And this is an argument that is made distinctly between men and women in the book talk spaces all the fucking time. But putting that aside, the content itself doesn't magically change based on the label. The only thing that changes is the perceived morality that shifts with whatever language you choose to use in order to describe the work, right? It is a very specific way in which it gets put out into the world, and we, once again, are left to be the moral judge of it. And then last but not least, in this like kind of category of sex work and the way that we discuss and feel about sex work is like Cal stepping in and comparing Cassie's OnlyFans to his own past behavior, which kind of just blew my mind and also blew Nate's mind. Because what Cal does or did is non-consensual, it's illegal, and it involved a minor at least once that we know of, yet he is placing it in the same conversational bucket as what Cassie is doing, which forces you to confront the differences between consensual sex work and exploitation, which I think the show is going to continue to push those boundaries as we go on. Now, in some miscellaneous but necessary bullshit that we must talk about, there is the COVID footage in the very beginning. It's a clip of Gavin Newsom telling everybody about the quarantine. Why Gavin Newsom? Because hello, we are in California. We have an empty Santa Monica Pier / like the empty beaches. We have a video of a mask on the ground. We have, Dylan Reed with his mask kind of like pulled down, yelling about not being able to work. Police shooting at people, someone burning the American flag, buildings on fire from these riots. And then we have a voiceover from Rue saying, all across America, young, free people, again, free, who didn't give a flying fuck about a global pandemic, packed their bags and went west. So first of all, I think this is providing a bit more context about where our characters are at this moment in time, and how COVID likely stalled their success, because Rue, Lexi, and Jules would have been graduating, I think, in 2020. They are a year younger than Cassie, Nate, and Maddie. So when we last saw them, which was supposed to be 5 years ago, all of these characters were still in school together. And we know that at the very least, Lexi and Rue are the same age, and Cassie is a year older than Lexi. So they're not all supposed to be graduating the same year. So this idea of like No Child Left Behind as an American success story, when their senior year would have been spent primarily at home in quarantine, could have obviously hindered what they felt their options were for their future. It is also just a depiction of a very specific faction of people who didn't care about the pandemic, because like from where I lived in New York and like how things were handled here, that was not at all my experience. Though that's not to say that like I was not aware of people who just like didn't believe in the pandemic, or certainly believed in it but just didn't care, didn't feel that they would get sick. So also I want to talk about the cinematography, because there is a lot of beautiful cinematography that's happening in this season. We have a lot of negative space that's going on, which is very beautiful, which is very different from seasons 1 and 2. And when I was really thinking about this, I was kind of like, well, we have this scene where Cassie says to Maddie, like, what if I could be a big fish in a big pond? And, in seasons 1 and 2, they're in high school. They are literally big fish in the little pond. And I think the amount of close-ups and tighter frames that we have in the cinematography in seasons 1 and 2 are designed to reflect that. Now they are little fish in a big, big pond, like out in the world, out in the wild, right? The wild, wild west. and they look very small in these frames. Like there's a lot of shots either with a lot of just like empty space or just a lot of open road, a lot of our characters backdropped against big world out there. Like Jules, looking out at the window over this big city. So it's just very different. I don't know. I was thinking a lot about that when she said, what if I could be a big fish in a big pond? We've also got a beautiful shot of Rue in her like very quick flashback of relapsing where all the lights go out. Literally all of her hope is extinguishing behind her as she calls her mom. And she says she hasn't really been sober since, but then later she tells Jules that she's California sober, so she drinks and she smokes weed, which we have seen her do. We saw her do in episode 1. She smoked a blunt and had a drink at Alamo's place. But she says she stays away from the hard stuff, even though earlier this episode, Angel offers to do coke with her and we don't see her do it. So we don't know whether or not that's true, because it could just be that like Angel, Rue lets Angel snort a line of coke off of her tits. Like, I have no idea. So we don't know whether or not she's actually done it. And the way that they have Zendaya like done up makes me think that she really is just kind of California sober, which is to say that I do think that she's not doing any hard drugs at this moment in time. Though I don't really know, and I guess we'll find out. Another little like kind of sidebar is like, as someone who's not a drug dealer and has never done hard drugs in my entire life, I can safely say that cleaning the scale in a massive drug dealing operation is common sense, I fear. I also want to give a shout out to my Uncle Rich, who I didn't know was going to be in this episode, but paused and was like, hey, that's my fucking uncle. I've mentioned him on this podcast before, and I'm sure I'll be mentioning him again at some point, but the guy who delivers Maddie and Cassie their drinks, like the pool guy, that's my fucking Uncle Rico. So shout out to my uncle. He's amazing. They got this like slow-mo shot of him coming out. They got his arms all flexed in there. So shout out to you, Uncle Rico. Nice landing this role in Euphoria. That's a good one for the resume. Pretty good. I also want to talk about the fact that like Cal shows up at Nate's and it feels like something that should not be happening. This is where the writing of this season feels off. Nate hated this man. He had him arrested. I'm actually going to say that he went beyond hate and beyond resentment. He held his father in contempt. Them just like casually hanging out and having dinner is fucking weird writing. I'm also confused what they're doing with Cal's character, because Cal is saying that he is a hedonist and not gay, when the whole point of him like pissing on the floor in the foyer was him coming out to his family and basically being like, this is who I am and you're all equally fucking disgusting in your own ways. Or did I misread that scene? I felt like that was him pissing on this idea of the American family. And then we see him later in that season, right before he gets arrested, with a bunch of people who are in this queer community. What was the point of his whole backstory with Derek, where he was about to go and experience this relationship with Derek, where he was falling in love with him, his best friend, only to discover that he got Marcia pregnant and like got roped into this American family? Why are they saying he's not gay? It's so weird. Okay, anyway, let's crack open the burn book where we will look at the superlatives for this episode. The Bold and Bothered Award, strictly for the Femme and the Furious. It is Angel throwing her shoe and hitting the dude in the face. I don't know the dude's name, but I thought that was very funny. He's like, bitch, I will take you down. And she throws the fucking shoe at him. And then we just see him like with a nosebleed after. The Shiro Award goes to the baddie who is the most inspiring, or the moment that is the most empowering. And I think this is Rue genuinely advocating for Angel to go to rehab, for her to step into the role of the one who has to do the intervention, the one who has to kind of lead the mentorship. I think that is a key role for Rue to experience this season. The Femme Fatale Award for the most Smash the Patriarchy moment of the episode. It is Maddie showing up and demanding work and then refusing to sit around when the pandemic hits. She's just like, you're paying me to stay home? I'm going to figure out how to make a bag on my own. Speak Your Truth trophy, best quote or line. It goes to Lori, who goes, I'm really happy for you, Alamo. God always puts you together with very young women. And then honorary heartthrob, because I'm just a girl, okay? And I want to talk about the most wound-worthy moments. And it's Rue, lover girl Rue, who just like wants to be with Jules. She thinks about her. And she shows up and she's just like, so the whole whirlwind romance is out of the question then? And that is today's episode of Femme and Furious. Thank you for couch rotting with me. Final boss couch rot. I've got a cigarette nub of Twizzler left. I will be back on Friday. I'm covering the deals chapters 11 through 20. And then I will be back on Sunday with another fully loaded bonus episode going into Margot's Got Money Troubles episode 4. And until then, don't worry about going to rehab. They take you bowling.